With challenges of population growth, the need to address sustainable development has become a global priority. Access to renewable sources of energy is a fundamental answer to this problem, and leaders of all nations are in the position to encourage and influence energy policies and legislation in their respective countries to aid in this urgent matter. The Commonwealth Parliamentary Association of the UK, the United Nations Development Programme, and the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago hosted the Caribbean Regional Workshop in Port of Spain from December 7th to 10th, 2015. This collaborative effort sought to empower regional leaders in an effort to achieve sustainable development goals and provide them with tools needed to make an impact on a national level. During the workshop, interviews were conducted with some of the participants to capture their views of the roles of parliamentarians in the successful implementation and achievement of SDGs. Justin Ram. Describe your experience with the subject of the workshop, which is sustainability, energy, and development within the context of Sustainable Development Goals.
I've had considerable experience with sustainability and energy issues even before my time at the bank. I've worked on these issues not only in a Caribbean context, but also within Latin America, within Asia and Africa as well. So I'm very familiar with this particular concept and now what Caribbean economies and Caribbean policymakers need to do in order to bring sustainability and energy into the mainstream of decision making.
What are the main opportunities and challenges the Caribbean currently faces in terms of energy and sustainable development?
It all comes back to the overall cost of energy, which is still too high in the Caribbean. It's really only in the commodity producing countries, in particular Trinidad and Tobago, to a lesser extent Suriname, and perhaps to some extent Belize, where you have energy costs that are not as high as in some of the other countries. Most of our Caribbean economies have some of the highest energy costs in the world. And so that really is an inhibiting factor for economic growth. What we have in most of our Caribbean territories are monopoly providers of this service. And so we're unable to get to a point whereby you can have, for example, individuals utilizing solar panels on their roofs, for example, generating their own electricity, and perhaps then selling that electricity back to the grid. That, in most of our territories, is actually impossible now. And it means that there needs to be a concerted effort at the policy-making side in order for us to remove those barriers to get the greater use of renewable energy. So I see that as being the most important challenge that we have to confront now if we are to have energy security and sustainable energy use within the Caribbean. Now, at the same time, there are so many opportunities because we have an abundance of renewable energy resources here in the Caribbean. The most obvious, of course, is the energy that you could get from solar. We live in a part of the world whereby we have sunlight almost every day. I should say maybe every day. And so that really is a resource that is certainly available to us and that we can utilize. Of course, it is not free. The sunlight is free, but then of course the conversion isn't free. And so again, it comes back to that regulatory environment. How do we encourage the uptake of the use of solar? Wind and perhaps wave energy as well as are also opportunities for us to exploit. Now, in some of our smaller island economies, particularly in the Eastern Caribbean, what we have found now is that there's also great opportunity with respect to geothermal energy. There's actually a concerted effort to exploit that now. Now, what perhaps could hold that back is unless those small islands are able to export the electricity that they can generate from geothermal energy, then those projects will be unviable. And so what we have to work on as well is a regional solution. How are we able to export that electricity from those small island states to perhaps larger markets so that in the end you get those economies of scale and therefore the overall cost of production to come down. And then that is what will make sense for the project to move forward.
How do you envisage the role of parliamentarians with regard to the SDGs?
Well, the role of parliamentarians, I guess, anywhere is critical, particularly where you have democracy. unless parliamentarians are making their voices heard, then the democracy is really not in a sense working for the people who have elected those members of parliament there. Now, I think that in a Caribbean context, parliamentarians are particularly important to ensure that governments, first of all, set targets for the use of renewable energy, and secondly, that those targets are actually going to be met by the date that they have been set to be met. How are you going to do that? It means that parliamentarians have a unique opportunity and a unique responsibility through the medium of the parliament to ask the government questions on an annual basis. How are they making progress towards these particular targets that they have set themselves for? Now, it's not only important to think about it in terms of meeting particular renewable energy targets for the sake of it. Because we live in the Caribbean and most of these countries are small island developing states, it's an imperative to survival that we ensure that, yes, our own countries are meeting these targets, but also much larger countries, the developed countries, are also committed to meeting those targets, because we don't want a situation whereby we have climate change and we have global warming above the 2 degrees Celsius that we know that if it goes beyond that, we're into dangerous territory, and perhaps we could have the melting of ice caps and so sea level rise, which ultimately can have a devastating impact on our geography here for small island states. So there's a huge amount of responsibility that rests on the shoulders of parliamentarians.
Final thoughts.
This workshop is critical for the sustainability of the Caribbean states, because the decision makers that are in the room really need to be aware of these issues of sustainability and why is it so important for renewable energy considerations in any decision making that they are asked to partake in over the course of the parliament that they are serving in.